Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and now Blue Sky at Hawk Blogger. And man, so excited to have our guest, Mike Sando, back of The Athletic here every Friday during the season. It has been an adventurous week, Mike. I woke up at my now normal time at 2 in the morning to put more gas in our generator, only to find the magic moment. I saw street lamps lit up, which means power was back. My next look was, is the modem light blinking or is it solid white? It was solid white. We had internet, we had power. It was like the Lord above had smiled on us for this one moment.
Yeah.
And it was great. It was great. How are you doing
Congrats.
down there, a little south?
We dodged a bullet. We didn't have anything.
Uh,
Crazy. We were all braced, and one year we were without power for like a week, and it was so cold in the house that like a glass of water froze on the counter. We had to leave the house. Kids were little and were wearing parkas and stuff. So we were braced for that, but just lucked out. We just didn't wasn't our turn. So we've had power the whole week and are grateful for that.
well, I'm glad to hear it. And, you know, the generator is probably the number one purchase I've made that, like, of all home purchases, that is the top of the list. It has saved our bacon so many times. Usually, we're able to have not only power, but internet. This time, not having internet, I just realized how bad the addiction has gotten. I had to read books. Like, we have no cell reception here either. So, like, that's
Oh,
just normal. We're in
yeah.
a cell dead zone. So like when the power goes out, when the internet goes out, we are back
You're
to
done.
like analog living here. It's like the prairie or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
It was rough. It
Yeah.
was rough.
Well, glad you're
So
back.
yeah, yeah. Well, it was fun to do some outdoor shows the last couple days. In the meantime, the Seahawks have also been dealing with power outages. The VMAC has been without power all week. I'm curious if they got back power today. They're taking cold showers over there. They don't have use of the hot tub or the sauna. Wondering what your thoughts there are. Do you think the story will end up being that this, affected their ability to prepare for this key matchup with the Arizona Cardinals?
Yeah.
Or will it be that this brought these guys closer together? They're going to each other's houses to
Yeah.
take warm showers. What do you think the story's going to be?
So I think it's totally dependent on the outcome of the game, which may not be a reflection of either one of those things, right?
Hmm.
These things do take on additional meaning in our lives based on the result of something that happens, even if they didn't influence it. Or, there could be just something that happens in the football game that makes the Seahawks win. I was watching Kevin Stefanski's locker room speech after they beat the Steelers, and this is about this and that. Okay, yeah, but if one little thing happens a little bit differently, then all of those meaningful things that would no one would be talking about them being meaningful, right? So I think you got to see how the game goes. I'm sure it's been a pain for them. I think they would much rather have all the power and everything going smoothly during a game week. I think it's probably a negative, net negative. But if they overcome it and win, they can legitimately take credit for doing that, and maybe it will bring them together, right?
Yeah, well, it's good you mentioned the game last night, the Cleveland Steelers game. That reminded me of one of my ongoing debates with Richard Sherman. I love snow football, and he, all the way back to his playing days, would just tell me that football played in those conditions is not real football, and you don't get to see who the best team really is. I don't really
Yeah.
care. I love it. What's your take as a
Yeah.
football fan, as a
Yeah.
journalist on snow football?
Well, I think it's perfect because it's not all the time. I think that's
Hmm.
what makes it special. Like if all the games were played in that type of a setting, I think Richard Sherman's got a great point. We wouldn't want that. And probably for a Super Bowl, you probably wouldn't want that. But I love it for, hey, you got to come to Cleveland and there's going to be fans there with no shirts on and it's going to be 30 degrees on Lake Erie and you got to deal with it. I loved it. I think it's great for the games that it is a factor, but I don't think it's in so many games that it's a problem. Does that make sense? There's a balance.
I think that does make sense. I'll take. I think I'd be able to take a lot more than we do get, but you're probably right. It would get a little old if it became the norm. It was nice, Cleveland, the Browns and the Browns fans getting a win like that in a lost season. that used to be one of the fan bases and the franchises that was easiest to cheer for. It's been a little harder the last few years for sure, but up there with
Yeah.
the Bills and the Lions, and so at least for Browns fans, they got to beat the Steelers during this year. And I'm curious, like you wrote in your pick six column about the Steelers and that the people are having more confidence in that offense than they had
Yeah.
before. Obviously,
Yeah.
that game's a little hard to judge. Where do you place them in kind of the overall mix in the AFC?
Yeah, I think they're going to be a playoff team that could win a playoff game. I don't feel like they were going to, I think it would be a very long shot for them to have won a playoff game in the past. I do think they still have some limitations, and those show up offensively, but they have a formula where you can win some games in that, they're going to play really good defense right there. You play good defense, you're going to win at least half your games, probably. And then the combination of the quarterbacks is interesting. I was thinking last night, like if they'd won that game, I don't think they would have won the game with only Fields or with only Wilson. Does that make sense? Like I
Mm-hmm.
felt like there's a balancing act of how to play the two players, and I think Tomlin's done a good job of that. I liked some of the stuff they did last night, but I don't think that that's going to be a formula to beat the top teams in the AFC, right? I think that would be a taller task for them.
Mike Tomlin's such a fascinating figure. I didn't intend this show to be about the Steelers and the Browns,
Yeah,
but we'll take it here for a
let's
second.
do it.
So he, I think, came up in the sense of related to Pete Carroll, in that
Mm,
Mike Tomlin just wins every year. He wins,
yeah,
and
yeah,
yet, and in his defense has been excellent almost all of that time. He's got a little bit of an identity. He's been able to have his team reflect his identity. I
yeah.
think Pete Carroll's downfall a little bit was his team stopped reflecting his identity and his
Mm.
philosophy for a number of years, but he did win. But Mike Tomlin seems limited in breaking out of this kind of middle, good but not great zone. What's your take on coaches in that situation? Do you think that a change of coaches is a chance to break out of that that's worth gambling on? Do you think that just having stability and having a coach that's shown he can win is still the best path to getting back to a Super Bowl level performance?
Yeah, I think when it's kind of time and over, and I haven't really sensed that. I felt like it was maybe getting to that point with Tomlin when it felt like the ceiling was lower than it is now, right? I feel like
Hmm.
the fact that the thing that really bothered me for a while about Tomlin was he really had a bad offensive coordinator situation and just stayed with it for a few years, right? I think the management of the staff and your willingness to make changes and upgrade on the staff is a critical component of keeping your edge as a coach. And we've talked about that before. We're typically later in the run of a good coach. You have leftovers on the staff, right? So I think the change to Arthur Smith has been good. I think that Tom was in a good job of managing the season, and I'm probably a little more energized by this Steeler team. I think their ceiling's a little bit higher. It's not all the way there, but I kind of want to see more of Tomlin, and I feel like maybe we'll see what they do after this season at quarterback, right? They don't have to commit to either one of these guys. They could have one of them. They could do something else, but I kind of feel like it's not completely stale, right? Do you feel that with Tomlin? You sort of know when a guy's sort of stuck, and maybe Tomlin was trending that way, but it feels like he's kind of he's gotten unstuck from the mud. You buy that?
I definitely think he's broken out of this zone he was in the last few years. Offensively, they were really struggling. They were really
Yeah,
having challenges finding the right players, and I think that they have stepped forward. I don't know that they've really gotten to be that much more interesting or truly a real contender, and I'm not sure I see the path for that for them.
yeah,
And so in that sense, it's just a fascinating. It's like when you have a good but not great quarterback, and teams feel like they're in a little
yeah.
bit of a purgatory where it's like, okay, you're going to be committed to this person for a long time, but that person probably will never get you where you want to go. In the tech world, they would call this innovator's dilemma. Like you've got something working, you don't want to try something new that could potentially cannibalize what you're already doing, and that means that other people can go and leapfrog you.
It's kind of, we just had the Hall of Fame Coaches Committee meeting, and a couple of the guys that were among the finalists were like Chuck Knox and Marty Schottenheimer. They were great coaches. I mean, they went to like four places east. Marty, they had winning records in three of them, and Marty was 500 in the fourth, which was Washington with Dan Snyder. He was 500. So great coaches, but they're almost like a victim of their own success. They're never going to pick high for a quarterback. And then they also have a little bit of a mindset towards not maybe de-emphasizing the quarterback, right? You're going to play defense, you're going to run the ball. Some of those things that are great core tenets of winning football, but not necessarily enough to win it all, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
those are great. Like to me, those are. Is Mike Tomlin now? Mike Tomlin's won a Super Bowl, so that puts him in a different category. He has done it, but he did it with a quarterback who was already there. So what's their plan or path to get a quarterback to get them over the top in the absence of picking in the top 20 even, right? How do you do that? You're probably not going to get Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes, but there's only a couple of those. So can you get just a little bit better than what they've got now, right? Can you get even a Kirk Cousins level or somebody like that? I think that's what you would strive to do because the rest of their operation's good enough to be in the mix for the playoffs.
Well, it's been a debate I've had with a lot of friends and colleagues around what your goal is, and for me, definition of success really comes down to rings and Super Bowls. Like I've often asked the question of other fans, if you could have 10 seasons where you have 9 losing records and 1 Super Bowl championship, or you have 9 winning records but no Super Bowl championships, which would you prefer? For me, it's no question. I will take the ring every single
Yeah.
time. And
Right.
I wonder with owners as well, when the business side gets into it, they're definitely going to prefer to have wins than just one ring for
Yeah.
most cases. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
But yeah, but you don't get to make that choice. When you
No.
have the 9 winning records, you feel like you have a chance to get it. So certainly if somebody told you you have no chance to win a championship for 10 years, no one's going to sign up for that.
You think?
Maybe a few
You
people
think?
maybe a few people would. Well, if you could say, well, if nine, there's some owners who probably would take the 9
Yeah.
winning records in 10 seasons and say, oh, you know what, we won't win a championship. That's okay. But I think the idea that you possibly could win one is an important feeling to have, right? If you just know you're out, that's not how it works. You
Hmm.
don't get to have the choice that way. I think you always feel like, hey, in a given year, something could happen to get us over the top. I'd rather have I'd take the winning records, but you can't tell me that there's no chance of that because if you're
Mm.
in the mix, I feel like you could do something to get over the top, right? You want to have a good program,
Yes.
don't you? You want to have a good program. When you have a good program, you you don't you may get the quarterback to get you over the top. Is there something that is fundamentally limiting Mike Tomlin from getting over the top? It would be your question.
Yeah, yeah, and here's my thing is I will take a lower floor to get a higher ceiling, and if I've seen a solidified ceiling, which I do think is still there with Tomlin, I would be getting the itch for sure. And in a
Yeah,
poker hand. I'm not a great poker player. I would be getting 5 new cards, starting fresh, even if
yeah,
that meant I could get a much worse hand the next time, because I just can't stand being in a perpetual state of not good enough. And I don't think there's a
yeah,
story to be said that the Steelers are going to jump out of that. I didn't think there was a story to be told for the Seahawks to jump out of that with where things are going with Pete Carroll. So I
yeah,
understood that decision. A lot of Seahawks fans do not still. So that's part of why I was kind of curious your take on that.
yeah. No, it's
A
interesting.
big story for the Seahawks, obviously, in making this move and moving to Mike Macdonald was they got a defensive coach. The defense had been pretty bad at times throughout this season. It seems to have made a pretty significant turn against the Rams and now against the 49ers in this win. And that leaves the offense. And the offense started strong this year. Ryan Grubb's come from college. And there were some interesting conversations about use of shotgun. And you talked about, did this
Yeah,
game represent potentially Mike Macdonald starting to assert his offensive philosophy this year?
yeah, yeah. I think it might have. I still think their DNA is 5 man protections and everyone go out for a pass and that's still part of their tendency. But I did I was watching out of the bye week specifically for that, right? Would we see some kind of a shift? And I think we did. We saw more under center. We saw probably some different types of runs in the run game, and it didn't. It didn't necessarily produce the great results that they might want to have, but I think it showed us maybe a little bit of a turn. So, and maybe the results come, as you kind of stick with that a little bit. I just don't think that Mike Macdonald, as a defensive coach forever, is going to want to be what they've been before this last week when we saw a little bit of a turn, right? With just a little bit. Just don't be so extreme in that world to where you basically it's hard to have a run game out of that all the time. So I'm going to say it is the start of just a little bit of a turn, and we'll see where it goes.
We'll come back to this. What were your reactions to that game in general?
I thought defensively it was a needed validation of the cut of the linebacker and Mike McDonald's program a little bit defensively. I felt like they needed to have some sort of tangible result that said, you know what, we made a move that had people scratching their heads, and it actually wasn't a desperation move that for no reason. That this looked like maybe some accountability or a plan, right? I thought that was important to not go out
Mm-hmm.
there and have the George Kittle-less 49ers rush for 187 yards and have it look the same. If that had
Mm-hmm.
happened, I think they're grasping at straws a little bit.
Yep.
But it didn't happen. So I felt like that was very good. Offensively, the late drive to win the game was awesome. And Abe Lucas coming back is a huge difference maker. So overall, I think it checked three important boxes. One, I talked about defense made a big change, and the coach looked smart for doing it. Number two was Abe Lucas came back, and you could see the offensive line could be a lot better because that offensive line thing's been such a problem that
Yes, it has.
this felt like a stop the bleeding thing a little bit. And you know what? Olu played at center, and
Mm-hmm.
we're not talking about what a bad day it was. It was like I think you had written, the number of times they had gotten a positive PFF grade. Which look, we're not saying PFF grades are the gospel, but like if it happens never and then you did, like okay, I say that. And then the third thing was you just won the game. The third thing was you beat the 49ers. That's a huge box to check. I don't care if Purdy's got no arms and can't throw the ball at all. Uh, those three boxes were checked for me, and I think those were good boxes.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about the significance of beating the 49ers for Mike Macdonald and for this franchise in a bit. Getting back to your comments about asserting himself on offense, and we're talking to Mike Sando of The Athletic, as we do every Friday. Two things there, Mike. You mentioned like the DNA might be, 5-man protections, not keeping extra guys in. And one of the fascinating things there that I'm still trying to figure out what's going on is Ryan Grubb has not been following his formula from college. I think everyone assumes it's the same. He actually kept in more extra men on protection at Washington than almost any offense in the NFL. He was very conservative and wanted to give his quarterback a lot of time. He has been more aggressive in his protection schemes here. And he also did run the ball more and more effectively at Washington with lesser personnel in the backfield, more personnel in the offensive line. So it's almost like he hasn't quite been himself, which is interesting to see.
There was a great. I saw this on X from somebody with PFF, I believe. There was a great kind of scatter plot there that showed the percentage of plays your tackles are or your offensive linemen are
On an
on
island.
an island
Yeah.
versus their grade over expected in that. And it was very interesting to me was in the very upper right corner were the two Eagle tackles. So those guys were left on an island all the time and kicked ass, right? So they're like playing well. Then there was these curious people like Stone Forsythe was way over there on the right, like the least helped guy, and his grade was lower. Obviously, he's not with those guys. His grade was a
Mm-hmm.
little below the average. And then I believe one of the other right tackles was down there too, not quite as high of being on an island. But I was just thinking, why would why if I'm Stone Forsythe's agent, I'm like, Can we not have him on an island? This guy's
Yeah.
trying to get some decent film out here. Can we not just take a beginner swimmer and throw him into the North Atlantic at 3 a.m.? That's what I'm looking at that saying.
Yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
know the tackles for the Eagles, if we drop them in there, these guys are Navy SEALs. They're going to swim underwater for like 3.5 minutes and emerge on the other side. They can do it. You don't do that with somebody who's at the Elks Lodge pool for their lessons, right?
You hope
And
not.
that's what I felt like. That's like if I'm looking at that, I wanted to have that answered. I want that question answered.
Well, the other side of that, Mike, is if you are going to try to play that way, and your tackles do start to play better, like Abe Lucas did. There's a really great film, Abe Lucas against Nick Bosa, that everyone's like,
Yeah.
when Nick Bosa went out, everything changed. That might have been the case, but if you watch every rep of Abe Lucas against Nick Bosa, he won that matchup time and again. And so if you're going to play that way, you're going to pay a lot of money for your tackles because you need them to be better than what the Seahawks have seen.
Very impressive. I think that's very impressive and underrated to come in off of such a serious injury out
Huge.
for a long time. And I know they took their, they had a process to bring him back in practice and stuff, but I think that's very underrated. It would be like a boxer coming in and you haven't boxed for like 2 years because of an injury or something, and now you're fighting the champion, Bosa, right? I mean, that's just you don't do that. So I think it was very impressive.
I was surprised. I expected it to be a much rougher game from Abe Lucas. It was a really impressive performance. Olo Timmy was the same. But one of the things, Mike, that I want to play some sound for you. I'd asked Mike Macdonald this week about whether or not, one, that people make too big of a deal of the jump from an offensive coordinator in college to the pros, and how it's been going for Ryan Grubb this year so far. I want to play this sound for you and get your impressions of his answer.
Yeah.
It's going for Ryan Grubb.
Well, I mean, I can't speak for other people, but to me, you're hiring the person. That was my plea to the organization when I was trying to get hired. Is I've never been a head coach before, and but you're hiring me. We hired Ryan Grubb to be our offensive coordinator, and so we want him to do what he does, his best as well. We want the best version of him to help lead our offense. So I think very much like with our football team, Ryan and I are growing together, and I think he's doing a great job. I think he does a phenomenal job of like doing the stuff that our players do well, and able to get the ball, to our best players at any given moment. So, no, I mean, we're still where we're at. We got to keep growing. We got to keep getting better, keep attacking this thing. But it's been fun to work with them.
Hopefully, you're able to hear that, Mike.
Yeah, I could.
What was your reaction to that answer?
I think it's fine. I mean, it's early on. I wouldn't. What would you expect him to say? I think it is they're early in the relationship together here, and he's sticking with them, and we'll see how it goes. But we're not evaluating it just off of this first 10 games. I will say this: since you started playing that, I just called up the Seahawks since 2010. That would be Pete's first year, right? 2010.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to pick another. I'll add 2010 into here. If we were to just take their EPA per play each season, this would be the worst since 2011. Is that right? Yeah, this year. So, they're 18th or something in the league. I don't think it's a disaster at all. I kind of want to see more. What do you think?
I'm in the same boat. What I'm curious about is whether this is a mismatch in philosophies, and whether the thing that stood out to me with McDonald's answer there was, like our team, we've been growing together. And the implication there is that they're not already there,
Oh, well, completely. But I think that,
Right.
like we talked about before, this was, I mean, I don't want to say an arranged marriage, but it wasn't like these guys had worked together for 10 years
Exactly.
at Weber State, and now, hey, just come on in. I think they are. I think they were matched, a little bit. And so definitely a lot on the plate of a head coach who's 37 years old and hasn't done it before, and just getting his own defense and his own house in order, let alone exerting full influence on the offense. So I think that's one big difference we talked about with like, Jim Harbaugh goes to the Chargers, and in week one they have the identity of what they want to be, right?
Yes.
And I
Yes.
feel like that didn't happen here, but it's
100%.
probably not surprising.
Well, and the 2011 piece is an interesting date to pull out, or year to pull out, because the question I have is whether this is a Jeremy Bates situation. Now, Jeremy Bates was someone who came with Pete Carroll and he did have experience with, but there was a lot of those 3rd and 1 deep fade passes that Pete Carroll's like, that is not who we're going to be. And he's like, we're not,
Yeah.
philosophically, we're not aligned. I'm going to make a change, even though they won the division and won a playoff game in that first year. And, I'm not either hoping for or expecting necessarily for this to be a 1-year marriage between Ryan Grubb and Mike Macdonald. But the philosophies are like what we're seeing on the field is misaligned enough from what I think the intended philosophy is that it's a question for me how that duo will go.
Yeah. Well, I think the rest of this season is important for that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I was kind of looking at after the bye, would there be some sort of evidence that this is evolving? And I think there was a little bit, but I agree. I think if they are, if they are what they have been for the rest of the year, at the very least, there will be more conversations about how they're going to play.
Yeah, and to your point, they did start to change their philosophy or their approach a little bit in this game against the 49ers. And for Mike Macdonald, I feel like this one win validates so much about what he was hired to do. That's going to give him leeway with his players, more buy-in with his players, and a little bit of a breath for those who hired him and have supported him. I think this was that big of a win because the opposite would have potentially led them down a really troublesome path.
Absolutely. I think it was hugely important. Yep. I think it showed, like I said, it showed progress in the 3 areas that I thought were most important. The defense at linebacker, the offensive line play with Abe Lucas, and then just winning the game. And then the fourth thing, which didn't, or maybe happened a little bit, was just, like I said, the shift to a little more under center, maybe an attempt to do things, which I was reading, an attempt to do things maybe a little bit more in the image of the head coach. So that last part will be a huge thing down the stretch to evaluate, and it's kind of a week-to-week thing to check in on.
Well, and we talked about Olu Oluwatimi and Abe Lucas. I asked Ryan Grubb yesterday, did Olu Oluwatimi meet your expectations? Did he exceed your expectations? I knew what he was going to say, but I wanted to hear his answer. And he said he met expectations, right? But
Yep.
I'll say, I don't quite believe it. I think they didn't know what they were going to get in those 2 guys. And I don't think you can game plan effectively until you start seeing those guys on the field. Now that they need to see him a couple more games, or at least one more game of similar performance. But it probably allows you to start playing or calling the game a little differently because it's very hard to call running plays when they're getting 0 yards. I think the Seahawks have the lowest yards before contact for the running backs by a long shot of any team in the NFL. So that's another way that this could start to shift.
And then also keep in mind that if you're changing your alignments or you're under center doing different things, that's an adjustment for the backs too, right? So I think could be a process or a period of time for those guys to adjust, Kenneth Walker, and you could have a situation where as you make some of these transitions, you leave some yards on the field, and then does it click? So I think that's something to watch too.
Mike, we've burned through our time again. Do you have a little extra this morning, or do you got to run?
Yeah, let's go. No, let's go.
Awesome. I've got a few more topics. It might be a little while. You give me a signal if you got to jump. So 49ers are the other side of that game, and they not only come out with the insult from their fans' perspective of losing to. Everyone's talking about losing to Geno Smith. That's like the worst insult from their perspective. And then you add injury to it. Brock Purdy has not been able to throw this week. He was on the field, at practice field. During warmups, he left and did not finish. They're now heading into games against the Packers in Green Bay and against the Bills in Buffalo. They're 5-5. Are the 49ers cooked?
Well, they're only one game out, so I'd say no. I think this division can still come down to the last week with a bunch of teams in the 9-8, 10-7 trying to get to that spot. But I am concerned about the Purdy injury. You know, if you have a shoulder, is that going to just be something you have to manage the rest of the year? It feels like it's tenuous to me. They lose these next two, which they really could. How does things get ratcheted up, right? Just the stress level and all of that. So I think they're diminished for sure. I think they miss Brandon Ayuk, and they've just been they haven't been themselves. They just really, even when they were, had good stats offensively, which I think they still do. He just wasn't quite in the same way. A lot of pressure on Purdy running around. Maybe we're starting to see that with him wearing down physically as well. So I don't think they're the big contender, but I wouldn't write them off quite yet. And I would think this division would be close to the end.
It's interesting with, you talk about Ayuk leaving, and he hadn't been having the best year, but they were getting pretty good performances from Ricky Pearsall. The rookie, obviously, Juwan Jennings, moving to the X, has been playing really well. Deebo Samuel has destroyed the Seahawks in the past. And then you get Christian McCaffrey back. That's his second game. And interestingly, Mike, the Seahawks had their lowest average separation in coverage of the year against the 49ers. And a lot of 49ers fans and analysts are like, they couldn't get open, and they're blaming the receivers, and the receivers are bad. I'm curious your point of view there. How much of it is the 49ers did not necessarily play well on offense? How much of it was the Seahawks secondary and Mike Macdonald's game plan actually stifling that offense?
I am inclined to think that haven't Purdy's windows gotten way smaller this year in general?
I don't know that. That might be true.
Yeah, I think so. I think just following enough of the coverage of the 49ers, I feel like that's been a little bit of an issue for them, that there's been less of just the wide open looks. Guys I think there were more of those earlier in the year, but I think there's been a lot less of those for them. So, I'm sure the Seahawks played a good game in that regard, but I think that's been an issue for the 49ers lately. And so it may have to do with that.
Let's turn our attention to the first place team in the NFC West, the team coming into town in Seattle that certainly was not dealing with any bomb cyclones down there in Arizona. The Cardinals, 6-4, come in here having, I think, one of the more impressive performances so far this year. I think from a coaching perspective, I don't know that they're in a situation to get Coach of the Year consideration. I'm not sure there's many teams that are getting more out of their talent, especially on defense, than the Arizona Cardinals. What's your take on this team? What's impressed you so far this year?
So, number one, Kyler Murray's healthy, and I think he's matured. I think all that stuff about, playing video games and contract clauses to make sure you do your homework, he seems like a different guy. So I think I knew he would be back more physically, and that could make them better, but that component of it, of just having some maturity, I think it's a big deal for their team. So I would start there. Quarterback, most important position. He seems to be getting it, like how he's playing. Then I think philosophically they have a real commitment to the run game with some good running backs, and they run the ball. So they've had a couple games probably with a couple hundred yards rushing. They're going to be committed to that in combination with the quarterback. If this seems familiar, Seahawk fans, a quarterback who can make some plays off schedule, right? So he can pick up a 3rd and 17 sometimes, or he can get outside the pocket and throw it over your head, that combination. Then on defense, to your point, I don't think they're super talented, but they hit. Like Budda Baker, that whole relationship, or they've got him playing. Remember how Budda Baker was just kind of like, are they going to trade him? Is he going to be some sort of a thing? It seems like he's playing great, and they've channeled that into the energy of their team. So that tells me there's buy-in to the coaches, right? Because we've got Kyler Murray, who was kind of a 50-50 guy. You weren't sure if he was all in. And Budda Baker, no one's questioning if he's all in, but it felt like he was like ready to get out of there, right? And I don't feel like either one. I think those are two huge players on your team, and it feels like they're both on board and a representation of the good for the program. So I think they're in a good spot.
This might seem like an obvious statement, but I'm going to make it anyway. The next 3 weeks seem like just defining for both of these teams. The Cardinals come to Seattle, then they go to Minnesota to face the Vikings, then they welcome Seattle home. The Seahawks host the Cardinals, go to the Jets, and then go to Arizona. Do you think the Seahawks have to win both of those games, or all against Arizona, or all three of those games?
Oh, no. No, I think they need to split with Arizona and beat the Jets.
Why do you say that?
Well, it's unrealistic to win all three. I mean, if you look at the Cardinals schedule, if the Cardinals split with Seattle, are they going to go win at Minnesota? That's their game.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
So, to me, if you get the split, there's a good chance that the Cardinals probably don't win at Minnesota. So you've made it up, right?
yeah,
You would be
I
two
think
and
from
one. They'd be 1-2, and you'd be tied, and you wouldn't lose the tiebreaker to them by getting swept.
true. I think divisional record wise will be interesting. And I can't help it. I really have been consistent, Mike. I don't think playoffs are what matter for the Seahawks this year. I don't think they're really contenders, but it feels like with what they've done the last 2 weeks or the last two games, even though they lost to the Rams, but the defensive performance has been consistent the last two games, that they might just make this interesting the rest of the year. And these next 3 weeks feel like the defining point. I think they need to sweep the Cardinals if they realistically want to win the division.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, maybe they do. That seems unrealistic to me that they would sweep the games. But I think a split is a good achievable goal, and then we'll see what happens later in the year.
I think the fact that you'd say that about a Cardinals team and about the Seahawks team says a lot about the Arizona team for what they've become this year after being 4-13 just a year ago and had low expectations. I think that's a credit to them and what they've accomplished so far.
It is, but it's also a reflection that the Seahawks aren't yet there either. I mean, the Seahawks when they were good had trouble with Arizona. You know? So
It's true. So, Mike, I want to take a moment. There's news that just broke that the Giants have released Daniel Jones. And I want to get your kind of instant reactions to that. That, this is a guy they paid a lot of money for. Signed the deal the same year Geno Smith signed his extension for a lot more than what Geno Smith signed for. And they've elevated Tommy DeVito, and not only that, but they've now released Daniel Jones. What's your take on that? What's going on over there?
okay, well that makes sense of why he had the emotional farewell press conference. I mean, I understand why you're doing that if you're on the team.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that, like Daniel Jones, it was like president was resigning for the betterment of the nation, and I was like, well, you're like the millionth guy to get demoted in the NFL. This makes sense. It was really the end. So he's being released. I understand the decision to change quarterbacks. I don't think he's been playing very well. And then I also understand the financial component where if he were to be injured, you'd be on the hook for a lot of money next year. I do not understand going to Tommy DeVito, except to the extent that the owner, when they let Saquon Barkley go, lamented that he's the most popular player we have by far. Second most popular player, for whatever reason, might be Tommy DeVito. So that would be the only reason I could see playing him over Drew Lock would be because the owner thinks he's popular. So I don't get that as a football decision at all to not play Drew Lock. You could evaluate Drew Lock for the rest of the year. Maybe they will in 2 weeks if DeVito, they can't win a game. But the ordering of it going to DeVito doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, given the fact that they did that first version of the Hard Knocks front office, series this offseason, they did not come off looking particularly functional in that. And the GM looked to be under a lot of pressure from the owner in terms of decisions that were being made. Those have not worked out well. But one thing that was clear is nobody in that building seemed to think Daniel Jones was the right quarterback for them. They were really aggressive in trying to see if they could trade up and get one of these young quarterbacks. They weren't able to do that. There were still other quarterbacks they could have picked, including guys like Bo Nix, who are now running up there towards potential Rookie of the Year challenges. Do you think that Joe Shine that their GM is going to make it through this season?
Well, I don't know that because uh, when they went to DeVito, I was like, is the coach and GM safe now? And we're going to play with
Right.
this guy, right? Because like, why would I don't think the football people would do that. I don't think any football person would go with DeVito over Locke. So it's hard to know what an owner like. I'll just put it this way. That, I think I said it before. I didn't think Dennis Allen would be fired during the year, and they lost to Carolina. So there's to me, we don't know if he's going to be kept or not. What happens the rest of the season could matter, right? If a bunch of their young guys, neighbors, and these guys are looking good, and it has a different feel at the end of the year, or what if they just lose out and and aren't competitive at all? I think it's not determined yet, and hard to know what the owner has said to these guys behind the scenes, or any of that. Hard.
Well, we'll set aside for the second that the Seahawks managed to lose to this team at home, which is still very painful and unexplainable for most people. But obviously, Brian Daboll is not gone yet, and who knows what would happen. But I'm curious, do you think,
Yeah.
I assume Ben Johnson is your pick as like the most sought after head coach for anyone that's seeking a new head coach next year? If you have someone differently, let me know. Where do you think his best landing spot would potentially be if
Well,
it comes
Well,
available?
a lot of the talk in the league is about maybe some of the second chance coaches, guys who've been coaches before. That's kind of been a theme, I believe. I independently was just talking to somebody from a team about that a week or two ago, and then I believe Tom Pelissero put out a list of coaching candidates that was
Hmm.
heavily talked about that. So we'll see. I think for the head, for Ben Johnson, I mean, you know, I think he's told us a little bit that he's great as a coordinator. Are you guaranteeing that he's going to be a great head coach? It seems to me like he hasn't jumped at those opportunities to do that. They've probably given him a huge raise with the Lions. And so we'll see what happens with him this year. I don't think it's a guarantee that he goes for a head coaching job. Um, if he does go for a head coaching job, I mean, would you, as the Chicago Bears with Caleb Williams, want to take him away from Detroit and have him go with our guy? I mean, that could make
That
some
makes the
sense.
most sense to me, like for sure.
Yeah, because I feel like a team like Jacksonville that's invested a lot in their quarterback Trevor Lawrence and got bad results. I almost feel like they need more of an identity. Like they need more of like a toughness to them.
Hmm.
I've liked somebody like a Mike Vrabel there. I know Mike Florio speculated Belichick, but something that's just a little bit more like just some visceral toughness to their team. I feel like
They need a
they're missing.
program
So
builder.
a little bit of a program builder, yeah, yeah. Whereas,
Yeah.
the Bears are maybe a little bit more down the road of this is their team and how do we make the most of it for this quarterback? Maybe that would be the type of place for him. I don't
Certainly be
know.
fascinating within the division. Mike, we love your stories. If you have one more minute here,
Yeah.
I'm curious, obviously as someone who's followed your career and seen all the greatness that come out of it and all the quality that's come out of
I
it.
don't know about that.
I know it's not always perfect, and I know that it hasn't always
Yeah.
been a linear kind of path. Is there like a mistake you've made along the way that has stuck with you that you reflect on that's helped kind of shape who you are as a reporter or made a big impact on you?
So there's a lot of them. But I could give you, I think they're kind of in a little bit of buckets. So one is preparation. So I one time in my 20s conducted a long interview for a feature story. It was a formal interview, tape recorder on the desk, 45 minutes, and the tape recorder wasn't on. Okay, so we actually redid the interview, but that's a be prepared, right? Check
Uh,
everything.
yeah.
Okay, another time I had written this story about somebody who had a complicatedly spelled name or something like that. I was very attention to detail in the story, and I woke up. This is back in the newspaper days. Woke up, newspaper. An editor had made a bad change and undid what I did, and I looked like an idiot. And I
Mm.
called the assistant editor at home on a Sunday, and I was all upset. And I remember my boss said, Mike, don't ever do that again. Observe the 24-hour rule. It'll save you a lot of headaches. Okay, so just take a deep breath. That was that one. For reporting and covering early on in covering the Seahawks, I believe Randy Mueller was the de facto GM, and Randy and I have done a podcast since then. But John Kitna was the quarterback, and I was interested in doing a story on whether they were having contract talks. And Randy kind of came into the media room where we were talking, and he said something like, yeah, they had had some initial talks. I did a story that contract negotiations had opened, okay? But they'd just been in touch. It really wasn't a fully accurate representation of the nature of what was going on. And it did a lot of damage to, I felt like it did a lot of damage to our relationship early on from trust, okay? So that is the long game lesson of, hey, as tempting as it is to have something that would be a good story tomorrow, make sure that you've got the full spirit of what's happening, right? Yeah, they had talked to John Kitna's agent, but they weren't like down the road to a new deal, right? So just be careful with that. The last one was, for me, was I had written a story where I had mentioned who got cut by the Seahawks, and they hadn't informed the players yet. I didn't know that, and Mike Holmgren got on my face and was really mad about it. And I mean, I'd still probably report that again, but the idea that what you're writing has implications of the people that you're writing about, right? That of course we have an obligation to get the story, but if I could go back and do that again, I probably would have been more careful so that those guys could have been known they were informed or whatever, right? That sort of a thing. Just, I think those are just the be prepared, 24-hour rule, play the long game, and then have an awareness of the people you're writing about are people. I think those are probably some good lessons right along the way.
Those all very much ring true for who you are. The 24-hour one I got to follow up with. I think I would have been, if someone had made a change that made me look bad, I would have called. Give us a little bit more about why that was a bad thing for you to do, to call and say, hey, this is a
well,
problem.
Because I called and I was really pissed off. Like I was
Okay.
a little bit too emotional,
Yeah.
of it. And I think that's a good lesson. I would still be upset now, and I would probably I would have nowadays like a Slack conversation with my editor. Hey, what happened here? But I probably wouldn't lead with just a right cross to the jaw. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
think I was so fired up,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
called. It's like, this guy's the assistant editor. He's like not even aware of what my story was. He's like, what are you talking about? You know what it was such
Yes.
a big deal to me. I cared so much that I like kind of lost it. And I think the lesson there is I wouldn't just wait 24 hours, but I think the lesson is, okay, hold on. You don't need to go nuclear with your
Yes.
reaction and
Yes.
call like the top person, because you're so important, Mike Sando, that this has to be dealt with right now. Because you're not that important. It's not that big of a deal in the big scheme of things. The sun came up the next day, and just deal with it in a different way.
Yeah, I love that, and a lot of wisdom there. Mike, we've kept you extra today, as we've done sometimes in the past. Appreciate your generosity with your time and with all of your wisdom. So hope you have a great weekend. I think you have a big one coming up, and we will talk again sometime next week. We'll figure out a time. I will be traveling Friday morning, but I think we'll try to find a time where maybe we can record something and put it up there for folks to show up on Friday.
Sounds great. Maybe we even do it Thursday night or something. So
That sounds great. All right. That is Mike Sando of The Athletic. The best in the biz as far as I'm concerned. And really nice to be able to just roll out of bed this morning and walk into my office and do this show without having to assemble everything and head out to a park. I think it's raining out there, which would have made it even harder. I know everyone loved the backdrop, so we'll see what we can do about improving some of the outdoor opportunities. If I get a chance, I don't mind. That was pretty nice being able to do that. Mike's story about the 24-hour rule reminds me of a lesson I had in my career. That, I mean, I've despite the fact I think I probably come across as pretty laid back in these shows. I don't know if that's true or not, but I've always been pretty fiery, and I've always been very, very competitive, like from the earliest ages. And there was a product that I had built with a very small team. This is early-ish in my career. And it sounds silly to say, but there was no good search engine inside of Adobe when I was there. People couldn't find anything. And there was just a lack of tooling for that. And so I had actually was the first person at Adobe to bring in what at the time they were doing Google search engine, enterprise search engine boxes. And I made a deal. I got one in there. I indexed all of this stuff inside Adobe and combined it with a couple other things like a profiling system that was kind of like a LinkedIn, but internally, and all this stuff. And I was really proud of this system, and it got really popular really quickly. And I was getting a lot of attention. Like Adobe wanted to turn it into a product that we actually sold to other customers, and it was cool. My ego was getting fed a lot. But the people that didn't like that was the IT team. The CIO had caught wind of this, and it was making them look really bad that this random person in the company of 10, 20,000 people had built something that made the IT systems look really bad. And one of the people within her team had scheduled a meeting with me, and I went in there and talked to him, and there was a couple things that triggered me. One, he was just the kind of person where you could tell from the beginning this was an ego thing to him as well. Now, admitting that I had ego involved, but he didn't like that I had done this, and that he felt like he could do it better. And he announced to me in this meeting, we're going to build, we're going to do our own thing here. And essentially, we're going to, because we're IT, we're going to make that the standard and put you, quote, out of business. He didn't say it that way, but that was the implication. And I left that meeting steaming, and I walked right into my manager's office. His name was Barry Hills, probably the best manager I ever had. Taught me so much. And he said, I was like, I am going to out innovate them, and we are going to, I think I said, we are going to destroy them. And Barry just looked at me and he smiled in the way that he could do in the most tense situations. He was always cool. And he's like, you could do that. I'm sure you could do that. But what would happen if we figured out a way that you guys both win? And it sounds very cliche and silly, but it took me a second. I was like, I don't want him to win. There's 0 point of me wanting him to win. But the part that did kind of leak through my rage at that moment was we both work for the same company. We're both trying to do the right thing. Me winning probably actually isn't me winning, because I might feel good about it, but there's going to still be enemies created along the way. There's going to be reputation that I get that is not a positive part of a reputation. And so I listened, and his counsel was helpful, and we started thinking about it and found some, I went back to the table to try to find a mutually beneficial path where this could become the company standard. They could get credit for it. I didn't need to be all the stuff. The right things happened for the company. And while ironically, it still, in the end, turned out to be a very political situation. And even though I ended up being very benevolent, I guess, or magnanimous, or pick your word, in kind of picking a path to building this thing, making it really good, and handing it over to them, they played along with that, and they ended up taking it and then killing it in a very politically motivated way. I still left that feeling like that's the way I want to operate. I want to, even if the end result is not what I wanted it to be, I want to operate with the integrity and the ability to reflect on what I did and feel good about it, as opposed to winning, quote unquote, and ending up feeling really crap about it. So that was that was kind of a similar, not quite a 24-hour rule, but Mike was talking about a story where a lot of that's ego. Like, you don't want your story to make you look bad because someone else made a change, and you get in there and react angrily. And I think especially young men, like we all, like not all of us, but a lot of us, big egos, especially early on, taking a breath and actually figuring out like what's the bigger picture is almost always good counsel. So that's what it made me think of. So I know that's not football related, but hopefully, that's meaningful to somebody out there. I know a lot of you guys are still either in tech or in corporate world or in working world in one way or another. There's a bunch of super chats I want to get to. Someone was asking if I live in Canada. I do not. I've become a big fan of Canada. I think maybe the Banff hat is probably what's confusing to people. This is new as of this summer. As of like June, we went on a big camping trip through. We went to Glacier in Montana, and then we went up through to Banff, and then back down through British Columbia. We fell in love for sure. Like, unbelievable trip. And we are now in the process of deciding, like, we're pretty sure we want to get an RV, but now we're trying to decide of whether we want to get like a true RV or whether we want to get a pickup and like a fifth wheel and have kind of the car trailer combo. I kind of lean towards the latter. I definitely it's nice to have a vehicle wherever you go as opposed to trying to park an RV. But I think we're going to try to explore a lot of the country that way over the next few years if we can make that happen. But that trip to up into Canada was a big impetus of that. We really, really like it. Amy says, "Oh, you're clearly fiery." Yeah. And then Vince says, "I can't see fiery Brian. You're just too nice." Well, I gotta say, Amy, you are more accurate in this situation. So, let's get through some of these super chats. We've got one here from Vince. Says, "Why does Huff not get more heat for the bad offensive line?" That's a great question. I mean, I talked to Scott Huff, and the interview I did is posted up on patreon.com/hawkblogger if anyone's interested in hearing that conversation. But I think that it's just a matter of cascading blame, at this point. And for a lot of people, they look first at John Schneider, who's been here for a series of bad offensive lines. And so a lot of people turn their attention to who is actually putting the recipe, like the ingredients together for the recipe, and that they think of Huff as still the chef. And there's only so much you can do if the ingredients are not good. And I think that's only partially true when it comes to coaching and when it comes to offensive line development, because there are coaches that take, mediocre ingredients and make something incredibly tasty out of it because they know how to develop and how to accentuate strengths and how to hide some weaknesses. And I'm not sure that Huff and Grubb have done a good job of that this year. So I do think they deserve some responsibility for the state of things. I think it speaks highly of Huff that Olu Oluwatimi, I think, has made a pretty big leap. The game he played against the 49ers, I don't think he would have played that game earlier this year. I like people that are like, oh, they should have just played him from the beginning. I don't think that's who he was at the beginning of this year. I don't think there was evidence of him being able to play that kind of game. If you watched his preseason tape, if you watched him in practice, if you watched his 1v1 pass blocking drills. So I think they've done some development there. I think you got to give him some credit with Charles Cross. Now, Charles Cross did work in the offseason, but this is the best version of Charles Cross we've seen. And we'll see what happens with Satawa Laumea. We'll see what happens with Christian Haynes. We'll see what happens with Mike Jarrell. But I think that Scott Huff definitely gets more than, 10 games to determine whether he can build an offensive line in Seattle. And I'll say this, that while I'm a very big Ryan Grubb fan and a big supporter and would love to see him here for years, I do acknowledge that might not be a good marriage, and he might choose other places to be, or they might ask him to choose another place to be. That's possible. I'm not, predicting it, but it's possible. I think if that meant that Scott Huff left, I think that would be a really big cost. I think he is a really good offensive line coach, and I would really like to see them get a few more years to see what they could do. So great question from Vince Leone. Garth says Sando is a 54% Mariner fan. Just kidding, Mike. Love the show. Thank you for the super chat, Garth. Ransom Cornwall says, let's go Seahawks. Thanks for another great show, Brian. And thank you, Mike, for all the great insights. Thank you, Ransom. Very nice of you. And thanks for being a member as well. Garth Knight, back to being a member for the last month. What procedure did Lucas have on his knee? We don't know. He has been not open and transparent about that for whatever reason. So there's nothing publicly that I can say about it. I think I have a pretty good idea of what it was based on some conversations I've had, but it's not my place to say it. And I'm not someone to break news, and I don't think it's important enough to take that chance. And so, it's his news. That's another lesson I learned from another one of my managers. His name was Aubrey Cattell. I loved, you get information and you want to share it right away. And I think the question was, is that your news to share? If someone's leaving the company, if someone is getting promoted, like in this case, someone's medical news is not really my news to share. Vince, back again. Dr. Vince says, who picked Grubb, Mike Macdonald or John Schneider? Now, Mike Sandoz kind of indicated this might have been a John Schneider selection. I'm certain that John Schneider had some say in it, but I know for a fact, having talked to Mike Macdonald and him being on record about this, that they met, that Ryan Grubb and Mike Macdonald met, I believe, at either the Combine or the Senior Bowl last year before, that was when Michael Penix Jr. was evaluating whether to jump out for the draft last year. And that they had stayed in touch since then. Michael Penix ended up staying. Obviously, Ryan Grubb stayed and had an even better year, his final season with University of Washington. So this was not a situation where Mike Macdonald was picking a guy that he had no experience with. And I'm not even sure that John Schneider has more to do with the hire than Mike Macdonald. In fact, I kind of had the opposite perspective. It is somebody that they both had a mutual connection with. And so that probably helped, if that answers your question. Garth with another super chat here says, Sando, favorite Michael Macdonald song, not Doobie Brothers. I keep forgetting is Cliche, but I can't choose it as my number one. I think Cliche is probably what you're saying there. Sorry, I don't like. I know that some of these questions are for Sando. When I have guests on, it's very rare that I'm going to get super chats up. So from a financial standpoint, it's probably not my best move. From a hopefully quality of conversation, I think it is. And so I try to keep it a little less disjointed when I've got a guest on. So apologies if folks wanted to ask Mike questions. What I will offer is sometimes if you want to leave a voicemail, I can listen to those ahead of time. And if it's something that I think is a good question to play for him, I will be willing to do that. Same with my other guests. Jeff Simmons is on with me tomorrow morning. Obviously we do Robert Mays on Mondays. We do Real Hawk Talk on Wednesdays, sometimes Big Rays, Rewind, all that kind of stuff. Feel free to target your voicemails at anyone with any topic, as I've said. I can't promise they'll all get played, but I'll do my best. So just record a voice memo on your phone, attach it to an email, and send it to brian@hawkblogger.com. All right. Taker610 says, Giant statement says Daniel Jones asked to be released. Not a surprise and makes sense. I'm curious where he'll end up. Is there a chance that John Schneider will kick the tires? Probably not. Maybe. But this is a guy that is a young, highly drafted quarterback and has some ability that maybe under the right tutelage could do something interesting. I don't happen to believe that, but there's probably going to be someone who does. I think you wonder if a team like Carolina would be interested in adding someone like him. I think you wonder if a team like Tennessee could be interested in kicking the tires. I don't think a team like Cleveland, but there's a few teams that might be interested in kicking the tires on a guy like this. You know, an interesting one would be the Rams. And obviously, Matt Stafford is not long for this league at 36 years old. People talk about Geno at 34. So Stafford's 2 years older and I think is much closer to being done with his career. We know that the Rams need a next quarterback. Do they see enough there in Sean McVay? Do they think that Daniel Jones could operate? He is from Duke. Like, maybe he's smart enough. Maybe they like something about him. That would be an interesting one to watch out for. The 49ers, I don't think. I mean, right now, Brandon Allen, or I think that's his name, and Josh Dobbs are some of the guys they've got. Maybe they'd be interested in someone like Daniel Jones, but I don't think so. So curious to see what happens with him next. Jacoby says, let's get KJ back at some point as a DC. I got to say, KJ lost me on a few things, not really related to football, but some of the statements he's made online that I found very troubling. And so I'm probably not as big of a KJ fan as I used to be. And I think the fact that he ended up going to the 49ers as a coach says a lot, because Pete Carroll could have hired him as a coach and did not. Nobody was a bigger fan or aware of what KJ had to offer than Pete Carroll. Interesting that he didn't see him as someone that he wanted to bring aboard as a coach. And I will say in KJ's defense that I think the 49ers have got decent linebacker play at times this year that maybe they weren't getting. I kind of go back and forth because Devondre Campbell's been pretty much a disaster. He has played a little bit better of late. Fred Warner had started out with his best season ever. He has tailed off quite a bit. He almost was a non-factor in that game against the Seahawks. So maybe I'm talking myself out of it, but there's a few of the backup linebackers that I thought have done a decent job, like D. Winters and stuff like that for the 49ers. So who knows? And the 49ers will expect to get Dre Greenlaw back here at some point. But, that's just my personal opinion. But I get it, Jacoby, why you and I'm sure a lot of other folks would want to see KJ back in the fold in Seattle. Last super chat I see here is from Hawks0. Says, besides Ernest Jones, any other free agent you think the Hawks should sign, 100% re-sign? Well, let's take a look. I will bring up the Seahawks free agents for next year. And let's go to 2025 unrestricted free agents. And I'll look through this. So, let me make sure I got this right. So, here are some of the names. Let's go through them. Jaron Reed, Pharaoh Brown, Jonathan Hankins, Kayvon Wallace, Travis Gibson, Laviska Shenault, Laken Tomlinson, Ernest Jones, Trey Brown, Stone Forsythe. Is that everybody? I think that's everybody, at least based on what I am seeing. I think Ernest Jones is the absolute. Interestingly, I think the Trey Brown piece, I don't think you went into the season thinking that was going to be a potentially important player to re-sign. I'm not as sure that they're going to feel that way with the way Josh Job's been playing. I think Jaron Reed's pretty important. He's certainly not a must sign. I don't think he qualifies as a must sign, but he is a leader within that locker room, within that defensive line room. He is who Byron Murphy has saddled up next to. And what we've seen with, even during the bye week, Byron Murphy, Jaron Reed made the trip to LA, watched the Laker game together. there's a mentoring going on there. So he's 32, or he'll be 32. He's having one of his better seasons. As I asked him yesterday or pointed out, he's got as many pressures this year as Leonard Williams. And I don't think, excuse me, I don't think a lot of people would expect that, but it is the truth. So, you know, I think he's a guy that they will want to bring back. I think there's probably a reasonable price tag for him. He's not having a lot of big numbers in terms of like sacks. He's not going to have a 10 sack year like he's had in the past. But this is like from a PFF grade perspective, he's on the way to his best graded season. He has a 71 graded defensive tackle. He is 70 graded as a pass rusher. A good run defender, and he's not having to play nose tackle all the time. Byron Murphy has started to take a lot of the nose tackle snaps. That lets Jaron Reed play on the end. I think he's much better suited to do that than play nose tackle full time. And so, I think he's a guy you probably want to get back, especially if you can get him at a reasonable price. But look, you're going to have a lot of extensions to work through. And I'm talking about, if you're talking about the 2022 draft class, this is something that is going to be a real question mark. I mean, these are guys that will be entering the last year of their rookie deals next season. Charles Cross, Boye Mafe, Kenneth Walker, Abe Lucas, Kobe Bryant, Reek Woolen, and Derek Young that are all still on the team. Tyreek Smith is he's on the practice squad, so I'm not going to really include him there. But I think you definitely are signing Cross to an extension. You're definitely signing Mafe to an extension. I think you're signing Walker to an extension. I think Lucas is a guy you probably want to see, especially the rest of the year, but you may want to try to get him signed to an extension. Bryant is at least a question mark. Woolen, you definitely want to sign to an extension. It's a lot of money moving around. It's going to be challenging to figure out exactly where you allocate all these dollars, and everyone's worried about the cap. One thing I will say is that I just am not worried about the cap. If they need to make room, they'll find a way to make room. I think there's a lot of opportunities for them to do that. I think there's some tough choices to make, but let's just wait before people get so worried. And there's all these people that tweet about, I don't know, like the Seahawks have the lowest cap space or the third or fourth lowest cap space next year. They're in a lot of trouble. It's a waste of energy from my perspective. I think that you're going to find out exactly truly how much cap space they have next year. The Seahawks have done a lot of one-year deals, which are really hard on the cap. Hopefully they'll do fewer of those next year. They've been using more void years to spread things out. There's just a lot. There's so many things that they can do. That's not my biggest concern. My biggest concern is, do they have guys worth extending? That's the question. If you have great players worth extending, then you just figure it out. So, really looking forward to this game this weekend. I will say one more thing before I wrap is that the first thing I did when I got my internet back, besides do a little dance at like 2 a.m, was I looked at the weather forecast because I wanted to see if there's another bomb cyclone coming. And I noticed that a few days ago, the weather forecast for Sunday was clear weather, or at least not rain. And I was like, good, I'd rather not be out in the rain for the game. But now the forecast is rain, like expecting to rain. Now, who knows how much and if it'll happen, we'll just see. But let's assume there is rain. So then I went over to ftnfantasy.com. Promo code HBAM gets you 15% off. So you can do all the searches on Stats Hub that I do. Less than $8 a month. It is an awesome deal. I'm a subscriber. You will want to be as well. So I went, and they're one of the only places where you can find splits based off of weather. So I filtered in Stats Hub by rain and looked at Kyler Murray's performances. How often has Kyler Murray played in the rain? I could only find 2 games in his career, his NFL career, that he's played in the rain. One of them came this year against Green Bay. Not a great game. They got blown out in that game. Kyler Murray had 1 touchdown, no interceptions. I think a couple 100 yards passing. Nothing terrible, but nothing impressive either. His only other game that I could find in the rain was against the New York Giants in 2019, his rookie season. He only threw for 100 yards. They did win that game for what it's worth, but he did not play that well in that game. If it's coming down on Sunday, like an Arizona Cardinals team, are they built for that kind of game? I think from a style perspective, they are. They're a bruising team. They're a rugged team. They're a run-first team. But they're used to Arizona weather. I mean, that's where they're just acclimated, and I'm just not convinced that they're going to be their best in the rain, if that happens. On the other hand, the Seahawks' best advantage offensively right now is through the air as a passing team. And one of the weaknesses of the Cardinals is pass defense. And I think that the rain reduces that advantage for the Seahawks. And so I'm not sure if the rain helps the Seahawks more or helps the Cardinals more, but the weather could be a factor for this game on Sunday. All right, folks, I am going to see you all tomorrow with Seahawks Saturday with Real Jeff Simmons, 9 a.m. Pacific time. I haven't figured out exactly what I'm doing Sunday morning. I'll do a pregame show. I don't know if I'll have guests or not. I'm going to reach out to a couple folks and see what we have. But if you have not already given the show a like and click subscribe, please do. Also, I'm going to keep telling you, amazing deal over at jkboots.com. If you use promo code HawkBlogger, you're going to get 10% off your purchase. This is a Washington-based, Spokane-based, family-owned company. Every boot is handmade. They're sending me a pair of boots. I'm so excited. They're going to be coming anytime now. So I'm going to be able to slip these on my feet soon. And if you use the code HawkBlogger at jkboots.com, you get 10% off. You also get a chance to win a Seahawks-themed pair of boots, blue bison leather with some gray. It's going to be really, really unique looking and only on your feet, or if you can give them to a gift made for their feet. And you help the Wildland Firefighters Foundation. We have donated 2 pairs of boots to 2 different wildland firefighters so far. And these are folks that are helping to protect our forests. That's the quality of these boots. Any logger, any construction worker, any firefighter will tell you JK Boots is renowned. And I actually just had my nephew, who is in logging sports, like beg for a pair. We just bought a pair for him for a holiday present. You know, when I told him that I was working with JK Boots, his eyes just became saucers. So like he was so excited. These are amazing boots. Really rare to get the chance. This 10% off using code HawkBlogger, plus all these other benefits. You'd be really wise to take advantage of that. All right, folks. I really hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I hope the Seahawks got power back the way I did, the way we did. Mike Macdonald will give us his final injury report today for the game. A little bit of a question with Leonard Williams, who's been out with a foot the last couple days. Personally, I'm guessing he's okay, but we'll find out. We'll also find out Abe Lucas did not practice yesterday, but that came out after Ryan Grubb had said that they expect him to take all the snaps on Sunday. So cautiously, I'm optimistic that he's okay, and they're probably just taking it easy on Abe Lucas. D. Williams, the punt returner, kick returner, did practice yesterday in limited capacity. Noah Fant came back in a limited capacity, so we might be getting Noah Fant back. May not have as dire of a situation at returner as we thought we might. So we'll find all that out later today, and I'll keep you updated. Follow me at HawkBlogger on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, and appreciate y'all. I hope you all are keeping safe, warm, and getting your internet wherever you can. Until I see you next, I'm Brian Nemhauser. This has been episode 243 of HawkBlogger Mornings. Take care, y'all.